Hey guys, tonight we begin with a war fought for freedom. At least that's what they told you. We're stepping into the muddy boots of a black soldier in the American Civil War, a man who volunteered to fight for a country that still wasn't sure if he counted as fully human. The uniform you're wearing is Union blue, but the treatment you're receiving is something else entirely. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just enlisted in the United States Colored Troops. The year is 1863, and after months of debate, the government has finally decided that black men can serve in the army. Not because they suddenly believe in your equality, mind you. They're running out of white soldiers and the war isn't going well. You're a solution to a math problem, not a statement of principle. But you signed up anyway. Maybe you escaped slavery and want to fight for the freedom of those still in chains. Maybe you were born free in the North and feel the pull of duty. Maybe you just need the money. Whatever your reason, you're here now, standing in a recruitment office, while a white officer looks you up and down like he's inspecting livestock. Welcome to the Union Army. They need you. They just don't respect you yet. The enlistment process itself is an exercise in humiliation. You strip naked in front of strangers while a surgeon pokes and prods, checking your teeth like you're a horse at auction, measuring your chest, examining your feet. The examination feels uncomfortably familiar to men who escaped slavery. It's the same posture, the same vulnerability, the same reduction to a body being assessed for its usefulness. The doctor makes notes. He doesn't speak to you directly. He speaks about you to the recruiting officer, as if you're not standing right there shivering in the cold room. Fit for service, he might say, or sometimes rejected, and you're sent away without explanation. Your willingness to die for this country deemed insufficient because of a bad knee or poor eyesight. Those who pass receive their uniforms, often ill-fitting, previously worn by someone else, sometimes still carrying the stains of that previous owner's service. You don't complain. You're a soldier now. Complaining isn't part of the job description. The first thing you learn is that equality stops at the enlistment papers. You're a soldier now, technically, but you won't be treated like one. White privates earn $13 a month. You earn $10, and from that $10, the army deducts $3 for your clothing allowance. White soldiers don't have that deduction. So while they're pocketing $13, you're taking home $7 for the same work, for the same risk, for the same war. The government's logic, if you can call it logic, is that you're more laborer than soldier. The Militia Act of 1862 set your pay at the rate for contraband laborers, not fighting men. Never mind that you'll be carrying the same rifle, facing the same bullets, dying in the same mud. On the books, you're worth less. And here's the cruel twist. Many of the men in your regiment refuse to accept any pay at all until the injustice is corrected. For over a year, soldiers of the 54th Massachusetts and other regiments go without a single dollar. Their families back home struggling to eat, all to make a point about dignity. The equal pay won't come until June 1864, and even then, only after protests, petitions, and the threat of mass resignation. You'll spend more than a year fighting for the right to be paid fairly for fighting. Your officers are white, every single one of them. The army doesn't trust black men to lead, not even other black men. Some of these officers are genuinely committed to the cause, Abolitionists who volunteered specifically to command colored troops because they believed in what this war could mean. Others took the commission because it came with a promotion they couldn't get elsewhere. And a few see commanding black soldiers as only slightly better than guarding a supply depot. You can tell which kind you have by how they look at you. The good ones learn your names, share your hardships, and fight alongside you when the bullets fly. The bad ones treat you like equipment that occasionally talks back. There's no path to promotion for you, by the way. No matter how bravely you fight, no matter how much you know, you will never pin an officer's insignia to your coat. A few men of exceptional talent eventually receive commissions, but they're so rare they're practically legends. For most of you, the highest rank you can achieve is sergeant. Leadership has a ceiling, and it's painted the color of your skin. The men in your regiment come from everywhere, and the differences between you are almost as striking as the similarities. Some escaped slavery just months ago, bearing scars on their backs and accents thick with the cadence of southern plantations. Others were born free in Philadelphia, Boston, or New York. Educated men who read newspapers and quote Shakespeare. The free-born men sometimes struggle to understand what their formerly enslaved comrades endured. The formerly enslaved sometimes resent the free-born for a privilege they never chose. But the army doesn't care about these distinctions. To the officers, to the government, to the Confederates shooting at you, you're all just black soldiers. And so you learn to bridge those gaps around campfires, sharing stories of where you came from and what you're fighting for. The man who picked cotton in Georgia teaches the man from Boston how to read the land, how to sense weather changes, how to move quietly through brush. The man from Boston teaches the Georgian to read words on a page, to write letters home, to navigate the bureaucracy of army life. You become brothers not because you started the same, but because you're ending up the same, in the same mud, facing the same bullets. Let's talk about what you actually do all day, because it's probably not what you imagined when you signed up to fight. You thought you'd be drilling with rifles, learning tactics, preparing for combat. Instead, you're digging. Endless digging. Trenches, latrines, fortifications. Your hands are blistered and your back screams, and you haven't fired your weapon at anything except target practice. The army sees black soldiers as laborers first, fighters second. They assign you fatigue duty at rates that would make a white regiment revolt. While other units rest and train, you're hauling supplies, building roads, and doing the grueling manual work that keeps an army functioning. It's not that the work isn't important. It is. But it's the proportion that stings. You spend twice as many hours swinging a shovel as you do shouldering a rifle. Some commanders genuinely believe you're better suited for labor than combat. Others are simply protecting their white troops from the dirtiest jobs. Either way, you're exhausted before you ever see a battlefield. And when you finally do get the chance to fight, you'll have to prove something that white soldiers never had to prove, that you're capable of courage at all. The skepticism follows you everywhere. Before black soldiers ever fired a shot in combat, white newspapers debated whether you would run at the first sign of danger. Politicians questioned whether your race was capable of the discipline and bravery required for military service. Even some abolitionists wondered privately if arming black men was wise. You feel those doubts pressing on you like a physical weight. Every drill, every formation, every moment you're being watched and evaluated. Not as an individual soldier with strengths and weaknesses, but as a representative of your entire race. If you fail, they won't say you failed. They'll say black soldiers failed. That pressure never lifts. It's there when you wake up and there when you fall asleep. and there in every moment between. You have to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy, and even then, the goalposts shift. Training itself is a strange mixture of tedium and transformation. You learn to march in formation, to respond to drum signals, to load and fire your rifle in a sequence so practiced, it becomes automatic. Left foot, right foot, shoulder arms, present arms. The repetition drills military discipline into your bones. For men who escape slavery, there's something powerful about this transformation. You're no longer property. You're a soldier, part of something larger, trained to fight. The rifle in your hands is heavier than anything you've ever carried, and not just physically. It represents a fundamental shift in who you're allowed to be. Enslaved people caught with weapons faced death. Now you're being taught to use one by the government itself. Some nights, you just hold the rifle, feeling its weight, still not quite believing it's real. The food is terrible, but that's true for everyone in this war. Hardtack so old it could deflect bullets. Salt pork that's more salt than pork. Coffee made from grounds that have been reused until they're basically hot brown water. You chew your rations and try not to think about what's crawling in them. The weevils in your hardtack are extra protein, you tell yourself. At least you hope they are. But here's what's different for you. The supply chain that feeds black regiments is often slower, less reliable, and lower priority than the ones serving white troops. Your food arrives late. Your equipment is second-hand. The rifles they issue you are sometimes older models, the ones white regiments have already discarded for newer weapons. You make do because you have no choice. But every inferior tool, every delayed supply, every shortage that somehow only affects your regiment reminds you of where you stand in the Army's priorities. Now let's discuss what happens if you're captured. This is the part that keeps you awake at night, staring at the canvas ceiling of your tent while the campfire pops outside. For white Union soldiers, capture means a prisoner of war camp. Miserable, yes, deadly often. But there's at least a pretense of military protocol, prisoner exchanges, the possibility of survival. For you, the rules are different. The Confederate government has made its position clear. Black soldiers captured in Union uniform will not be treated as prisoners of war. They will be treated as slaves in insurrection. That means execution on the spot or return to slavery, sometimes for men who were born free and have never been enslaved in their lives. Jefferson Davis himself signed an order declaring that black soldiers and their white officers would be handed over to state authorities for punishment. In practice, this meant whatever the capturing Confederate soldiers felt like doing, and what they felt like doing was often unspeakable. The white officers who command you face their own special danger. The Confederacy considers them criminals for leading black troops, race traitors deserving of harsher punishment than ordinary prisoners of war. Some captured officers of colored regiments were executed. Others were held in brutal conditions, singled out for abuse. The men who volunteer to lead you know this risk. The good ones accept it as the price of doing something meaningful. They understand that their fate is tied to yours now, for better or worse. When you see your colonel march at the front of a charge, you know he's not just leading soldiers. He's putting his life on a different kind of line than other officers face. That shared danger creates bonds that transcend the racial hierarchy the Army tries to maintain. The massacre at Fort Pillow haunts every black soldier who hears about it. April 1864. A Confederate force under Nathan Bedford Forrest attacks a Union garrison in Tennessee. About half the defenders are black soldiers from the 6th United States Colored Heavy Artillery and the 2nd United States Colored Light Artillery. When the fort falls, the killing doesn't stop. Confederate soldiers murder black troops who have already surrendered, shooting them, bayoneting them, burning some alive in their tents. The exact numbers are disputed, but what's not disputed is the disparity. Black soldiers died at far higher rates than white soldiers in the same battle, and many of those deaths came after resistance had ended. Survivors describe being hunted down, pleading for their lives, being killed anyway. The cry, "Remember Fort Pillow," becomes a rallying call in black regiments, fuel for fury and determination. But it's also a reminder of what awaits you if the battle goes badly. You don't just risk death in combat. You risk something worse than death if you're captured. Every time you march toward enemy lines, you carry that knowledge with you. Your fellow white soldiers have complicated feelings about your presence. Some are abolitionists who welcome you as brothers in the cause. They share their rations, teach you camp tricks, and treat you like fellow men. Others tolerate you with cold indifference, neither hostile nor friendly, simply uninterested in knowing you as anything other than another body in uniform. And some hate you. They didn't sign up to fight alongside black men. They came to preserve the Union, not to free slaves, and your presence in their army feels like a betrayal of what they thought they were fighting for. These men mutter insults as you pass. They start fights over nothing. They make it clear that even though you wear the same blue coat, you are not the same to them. You've learned to read the temperature of a camp quickly, to know which white soldiers are safe to approach and which ones carry a hostility that could turn violent after a few drinks. The Brotherhood of Arms has limits, and you know exactly where they are. Medical care in the Civil War is a horror show for everyone, but it's especially grim for black soldiers. The army doesn't have enough surgeons to begin with, and the ones assigned to colored regiments are often the least experienced, the least qualified, or the least interested in being there. Some are dedicated physicians who do their best with limited resources. Others view their assignment as punishment and treat their patients accordingly. Hospital wards for black soldiers are frequently segregated, overcrowded, and underfunded. The mortality rate from disease, which kills far more soldiers than bullets in this war, is higher in black regiments than white ones. Part of this is the labor you're assigned. All that digging, all that fatigue duty, wears down your body and makes you more susceptible to illness. Part of it is the conditions you're given. Tents that leak, blankets that don't arrive, camps pitched in swampy ground that breeds mosquitoes and fever. And part of it is simply that your life is valued less. When resources are scarce, and they're always scarce, guess which regiments get shorted first? You lie awake some nights thinking about home, about the people you left behind. If you escape slavery to join the army, you wonder about families still in bondage. Are they safe? Will this war free them? Will you live long enough to see it happen? The not knowing is its own kind of torture. You might have a wife still on a plantation in Virginia, children you haven't seen in years, a mother who doesn't know if you're alive or dead. The war could free them, or it could get them killed as punishment for your escape. You have no way of finding out. Letters can't reach them. News doesn't travel. You just have to hope and keep fighting. If you were born free in a northern city, you think about the mother who cried when you enlisted, the father who was proud but terrified, the siblings who looked at you like you were already a ghost. Letters are precious things in army camps. They arrive weeks after they were written, crumpled and dirt-stained, but they might as well be made of gold. You read them over and over until you've memorized every word. But writing back is its own challenge. Many soldiers in the colored troops never learned to read or write. Slavery didn't encourage literacy, to put it mildly. So they dictate letters to comrades who can write, or to chaplains who serve that function. Their most intimate thoughts filtered through another man's hand. The letters that survived from Black Civil War soldiers are some of the most moving documents of the era, filled with love, longing, and a desperate hope that their sacrifice will mean something. Let's talk about your first real battle. The moment when all the drilling and digging and waiting finally becomes the chaos you signed up for. Your heart hammers so hard you can feel it in your teeth. Your hands are slick with sweat on your rifle. The man next to you is praying under his breath. The same words over and over, a rhythm to keep the fear at bay. The officers are shouting, the drums are beating, and somewhere ahead of you is a line of men who want to kill you. Not just because you're wearing Union blue, because of what you are. Because your very presence on this battlefield is an affront to everything they're fighting to preserve. That knowledge sits in your stomach like a stone. You're not just a soldier to them. You're a symbol, and symbols attract special hatred. The command comes. You move forward. The noise is indescribable. A roar that seems to come from everywhere at once. Rifles cracking, cannons thundering, men screaming. You can't see much through the smoke. You just follow the man in front of you and try not to trip over the bodies that start appearing in the grass. The assault on Fort Wagner in July 1863 becomes the most famous engagement of black soldiers in the war, though famous might not be the right word. The 54th Massachusetts leads the charge against a heavily fortified Confederate position on the South Carolina coast. They know it's going to be brutal. The approach is a narrow strip of beach. The fort is ringed with ditches and walls, and Confederate guns have clear fields of fire. It's practically suicidal. But the 54th's commander, Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, a white abolitionist from a wealthy Boston family, believes his men need this chance to prove themselves in combat. And the men themselves want it. They're tired of being told they can't fight, won't fight, shouldn't fight. They want to show what they're made of, so they charge into the teeth of the Confederate defenses at dusk, scrambling up the sandy slope while bullets tear through their ranks. Shaw falls. On the parapet, killed almost immediately. The assault fails. Nearly half the regiment is killed, wounded, or captured. The Confederates bury Shaw in a mass grave with his black soldiers, intending it as an insult. His family says leave him there. He would have wanted it. The Battle of the Crater in July 1864 becomes another bloody lesson in how the Army uses and discards black soldiers. Union engineers dig a tunnel under Confederate lines at Petersburg and pack it with explosives. The plan is to blow a hole in the enemy defenses and send troops pouring through. Originally, black soldiers of the 4th Division are trained specifically for this assault. They rehearse for weeks, learning how to navigate the crater and fan out on either side. But at the last minute, the commanding general gets cold feet. He worries that if the attack fails and black soldiers die in large numbers, he'll be accused of using them as cannon fodder. So he sends in untrained white divisions first. The attack becomes a disaster. White troops pour into the crater but don't know what to do next. They mill around in confusion while Confederates regroup and begin firing down into the pit. When black soldiers are finally sent in, they're advancing into a slaughter. Confederate troops show them no mercy. Survivors describe rebels shouting that they would give no quarter to black soldiers, shooting men who tried to surrender. The battle becomes a massacre, and afterward, everyone blames everyone else. The black soldiers who were prepared for this mission never got to execute it properly. Instead, they were thrown in as reinforcements to a doomed assault and died for someone else's failure. The aftermath of a battle is its own particular hell. You're still alive somehow. Your ears are ringing so loudly, you can barely hear the groans of the wounded around you. Your uniform is soaked with sweat and other things you don't want to identify. The ground is carpeted with bodies, some in blue, some in grey, some still moving, most not. You help carry the wounded to the field hospital, which is really just a tent where overwhelmed surgeons work by lantern light, their aprons dark with blood. The smell is something you'll never forget, a combination of gunpowder, copper, and that particular sweetness of wounds going bad. You see things that will visit you in dreams for the rest of your life. Men missing limbs, men missing faces, men calling for their mothers in voices that don't sound human anymore. And when the burial details go out, you notice something. Confederate dead are often buried with more care than Union-colored troops. Even in death, the hierarchy persists. Camp life between battles is a strange limbo of boredom, exhaustion, and anxiety. You drill, you dig, you wait for orders that may never come or may come tomorrow. You play cards with men whose faces have become more familiar than your own families. You sing songs around the campfire, spirituals that carry generations of sorrow and hope, secular songs that mock your situation with dark humor. You listen to the sergeants who've been in the army longer, tell stories about engagements they've survived, lessons wrapped in anecdotes about men who made fatal mistakes. You learn to sleep through almost anything, to grab rest whenever it's offered, because you never know when you'll get the chance again. The rhythm of army life becomes its own kind of normalcy. Even though nothing about your situation is normal, you're a black man in a country that still can't decide if you're property or person, wearing the uniform of an army that still can't decide if you're soldier or laborer, fighting for a government that still can't decide if you deserve equality. And yet here you are, doing the work anyway. Nighttime in camp brings its own texture. The fires burn low. Sentries pace the perimeter, their footsteps crunching on leaves or squelching in mud, depending on the season. Men huddle under thin blankets, pressed, together for warmth, their breath fogging in the cold air. You hear coughing from the sick tents, the distant whinny of horses, the occasional bark of an officer's dog, and underneath it all, the quiet conversations of men who can't sleep. They talk about home, about women they left behind, about what they'll do when the war ends. Some talk about buying land, starting businesses, living like free men in a free country. Others are more cynical. They've seen too much already to believe the country will change just because they bled for it. The optimists and the pessimists argue in hushed voices while the stars wheel overhead, both knowing that tomorrow might bring orders that make all their plans irrelevant. The Emancipation Proclamation changed everything and nothing. It declared slaves in Confederate territories free, which was wonderful in principle, except the Confederacy didn't exactly take orders from Abraham Lincoln. For slaves still behind enemy lines, freedom remained, theoretical until Union troops actually arrived to enforce it. But for you, the proclamation matters in a different way. It transformed the war from a fight to preserve the Union into a fight to end slavery. It gave your service meaning beyond military necessity. You're not just filling a gap in the ranks anymore. You're fighting for something that will change the country forever. At least, that's how you see it. Not everyone in the Union Army agrees. Some white soldiers resent the shift in war aims. They didn't sign up for abolition. They signed up to put down a rebellion. And now they're being told they're fighting to free people they've been taught their whole lives to look down upon. The grumbling in some white regiments is loud enough to hear from your side of camp. Let's talk about the strange experience of liberating enslaved people as you march through Confederate territory. Your regiment enters a plantation, and the enslaved people there see you, a black man in Union blue, carrying a rifle. The looks on their faces are something you'll carry with you forever. Disbelief first, then a dawning hope that transforms into joy so overwhelming some of them weep and fall to their knees. They touch your uniform like it's sacred. They ask your name, where you're from, if freedom is real now, or just another broken promise. Old women bless you. Children follow the column for miles, not wanting to let you out of their sight. It's the most meaningful thing you've ever done, and it fuels you through every indignity the army throws at you. But there's complexity too. Some of these people are your family, scattered by the slave trade years ago. Some speak with accents that match your grandmother's voice. The war has made you an instrument of liberation, but it's also shown you the full scope of what slavery did. Families torn apart, bodies scarred by the lash, spirits that flicker between defiance and brokenness. You free them because you can, but freedom is just the beginning of a longer journey. The contraband camps that spring up near Union lines are filled with people who escaped slavery seeking protection. Women, children, elderly people who couldn't fight but refused to stay in bondage. They cluster around the army like refugees, which is exactly what they are. The army doesn't quite know what to do with them. Some commanders put them to work, paying meager wages for labor. Others try to push them away, seeing them as a burden. The conditions in these camps are often terrible, crowded and unsanitary, breeding grounds for disease. You see children die of illnesses that proper food and shelter might have prevented. You see women who escaped one form of exploitation fall victim to another at the hands of Union soldiers who see them as fair game. The freedom your army brings is real, but it's also incomplete, messy, full of suffering that nobody planned for. You do what you can. You share your rations. You protect who you're able to protect. But you're just one soldier, and the need is overwhelming. The Confederate response to black soldiers in Union blue grows more vicious as the war progresses. They see your presence as an insult, an inversion of the natural order they're fighting to preserve. Propaganda describes you as savages, beasts, subhuman creatures who will commit atrocities if not stopped. The reality is that black regiments generally behave with the same discipline as any other troops, sometimes more so because you know how closely you're being watched. But reality doesn't matter to men who've built their entire society on the premise of your inferiority. They can't afford to see you as soldiers. They can only see you as threats to everything they believe. This ideology fuels the massacres, the refusal to take prisoners, the special hatred reserved for black men in blue. You're not just an enemy combatant. You're an existential challenge to their worldview, and they'd rather kill you than let that challenge stand. Summer heat and winter cold both find ways to make camp life miserable. In the swampy lowlands of the South Carolina coast, where many black regiments serve, the heat is suffocating and the mosquitoes are thick enough to drink. Malaria sweeps through camps like wildfire. Men shiver with fevers one day and sweat through soaked shirts the next. The medical staff does what they can, which isn't much. Quinine helps if you can get it, but supplies are inconsistent. You lose men to disease who never saw a Confederate soldier, never fired their rifle in anger, just wasted away in their cots while the swamp breathed fever into the air. In winter, it's exposure and pneumonia, tents that don't hold heat, blankets that arrive weeks late or not at all, firewood rationed because supply trains prioritize ammunition. You learn to layer everything you own, to sleep pressed against your bunkmates for warmth, to stomp your feet constantly to keep blood flowing. The war doesn't pause for weather, neither does your suffering. Religion sustains many soldiers in the colored troops. Chaplains hold services that become part of the regiment's rhythm. Moments of peace amid the chaos. The songs you sing carry weight that only those who've lived under slavery can fully understand, melodies passed down through generations, encoded with messages of hope and resistance. When you sing about crossing Jordan, about laying down your burdens, about meeting on the other side, the words mean something specific. This is the theology of the oppressed, faith forged in suffering and refined by the hope that suffering isn't the final word. Not every soldier is devout, of course. Some have lost whatever faith they once had, ground down by the brutality of what they've witnessed. But even the skeptics often quiet down during services, respecting the comfort it brings to their brothers. In an army where you're constantly reminded of your lesser status, church is one place where everyone is equal before something greater than military rank. By the war's end, nearly 180,000 black men have served in the Union Army. They've fought in over 400 engagements. They've proven their courage so definitively that even skeptics have been forced to acknowledge it. 25 black soldiers and sailors received the Medal of Honor. The arguments that black men couldn't fight, wouldn't fight, lacked the intelligence or discipline for military service, have been demolished by evidence written in blood. You survived, let's say. Many didn't. 1 in 5 black soldiers died during the war, a rate significantly higher than white troops. Most of those deaths came from disease, not combat, a grim testament to the conditions you were forced to endure. But you made it. The war is over. The Confederacy is defeated. Slavery is abolished. Everything you fought for has been achieved. Except it hasn't, not really. You return home to a country that still doesn't know what to do with you. The gratitude for your service evaporates quickly. Within a few years, the promises of reconstruction begin to crumble. The vote you were given is stolen back through violence and legal trickery. The equality you fought for retreats behind new walls of segregation. Black veterans are targeted by terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, precisely because you proved something dangerous, that black men could fight and win. That knowledge threatens the old order, and the old order fights back with night rides and burning crosses and strange fruit hanging from southern trees. The pension you were promised arrives late, arrives reduced, arrives with bureaucratic obstacles designed to discourage you from claiming it. The country you saved struggles to remember your contribution, rewrites the war as a noble conflict between brothers rather than a battle over human bondage. By the time your grandchildren learn about the Civil War, your story will be a footnote if it's mentioned at all. You grow old in a country that prefers to forget you. The reunions of white veterans become national events, celebrated and honored. The reunions of black veterans are smaller, quieter, often ignored by the press. When monuments go up on battlefields, they commemorate white regiments. The colored troops who bled on the same ground are rendered invisible, their sacrifice erased from the marble and bronze that's supposed to remember the war. You watch former Confederates regain political power. Watch the freedoms you fought for stripped away one by one. Watch a new system of oppression rise from the ashes of the old one. The hope you carried through those years of war, the belief that your service would change things, curdles into something more complicated. You're proud of what you did. You have to be. But you're also angry and tired and wondering if any of it mattered. But you know what you did. You know the weight of that rifle in your hands, the terror of that charge, the joy on the faces of the people you liberated. You know the names of the men who died beside you, friends whose faces visit your dreams decades later. You know that you fought twice, once against the Confederacy and once against the Union's own reluctance to treat you as fully human. You won both battles in their way. Not completely, not permanently. The work you started would take another century to continue, and it's not finished yet. But you proved something that could never be unproved, that when given the chance, you fought with everything you had for a country that gave you almost nothing in return. And somehow, against all odds, you survived to tell the story. So tonight, as you lie in your own bed, safe and warm and far removed from the mud and blood of a war that ended long ago, maybe spare a thought for those soldiers. The men who signed up knowing the pay was unfair, the danger was doubled, and the recognition might never come. They did it anyway. They grabbed that chance to fight for something greater than themselves, even when the country they were saving couldn't see their full humanity. Their names are mostly lost now, scattered in pension records and cemetery rolls, but their legacy shaped everything that came after. Every step toward equality that followed stands on the foundation they built with courage, sacrifice, and a stubborn refusal to accept that their lives were worth less. They were soldiers. They deserve to be remembered as such. Congratulations. You've just woken up in a Harlem tenement, sometime around 1925. The good news is you're alive, and you're in the most vibrant black community in America. The bad news is you're sharing a 2-room apartment with 7 other people, and someone's elbow is currently pressed against your face. Your bed isn't really a bed. It's a mattress on the floor, or maybe just a pallet of blankets wedged into whatever corner wasn't already claimed. The concept of personal space doesn't exist here, not because people don't want it, but because landlords have figured out they can charge 3 times the rent to black families desperate for housing in a city that doesn't want them anywhere else. You blink awake to the sound of the elevated train rattling past your window, shaking the walls like a small earthquake every 15 minutes. The glass panes vibrate in their frames. Dust falls from the ceiling in tiny clouds. You've learned to sleep through it, mostly, the way soldiers learn to sleep through artillery. The room smells of bodies and yesterday's cooking, and the particular mustiness of plaster that's been wet too many times. There's no ventilation to speak of, just one window that faces a brick wall 3 feet away, letting in approximately no fresh air and all of your neighbor's cigarette smoke. The building itself is a monument to neglect. Built decades ago for white families who've long since fled to better neighborhoods, it was never meant to house this many people. The stairs sag in the middle where thousands of feet have worn them down. The hallways are dark because the landlord won't replace burned-out bulbs, and the walls are covered in a greasy film that never seems to wash off no matter how hard the women scrub. Paint peels in long, curling strips, revealing layers of older colors beneath, a geological record of the building's slow decay. The banister wobbles dangerously, and everyone knows to grip it lightly, if at all. Children have fallen. Old folks have tumbled. Nobody sues because who has money for lawyers, and what would be the point anyway? You try to sit up without disturbing the person next to you, probably a cousin who arrived last month from Georgia, still looking for work, still sleeping on your floor, because where else would they go? The Great Migration is in full swing, and every week another relative or friend of a friend shows up at your door with a cardboard suitcase and eyes full of hope that New York will be different from the South they fled. And it is different. There are no lynch mobs here, no sharecropper contracts that keep you perpetually in debt, no white men who can murder you for looking at them wrong without facing any consequence at all. But different doesn't mean easy. Different just means the violence wears a different face. You swing your feet onto the floor and immediately regret it, because the linoleum is peeling and cold even in summer, and in winter it feels like standing on a frozen pond. The toilet is down the hall, shared with 4 other families. There's always a line in the morning, and the smell drifting from that direction suggests someone had a rough night. You grab your robe, if you have one, and join the queue, nodding to Mrs. Patterson from 4B, who's been waiting so long she's nearly fallen back asleep standing up. Mr. Williams from 4D is ahead of her, shifting from foot to foot with increasing urgency, muttering under his breath about the injustice of shared facilities. His wife died last winter from pneumonia, and he's been slowly unraveling ever since, talking to himself more than to others, forgetting to eat unless someone reminds him. The community watches out for him because that's what you do here, but watching out only goes so far when everyone's barely surviving themselves. The bathroom itself is a marvel of urban decay. The toilet runs constantly, a thin stream of water that adds to the building's already precarious plumbing. The sink has one working faucet that produces a trickle of rust-colored water, and you've learned to let it run for a full minute before splashing any on your face. The tub, well, nobody uses the tub anymore, not since something started growing in it that no amount of scrubbing could remove. A dark greenish stain that seems to spread a little more each month. The mirror above the sink is cracked diagonally, giving you 2 slightly offset reflections every time you look at yourself. You do your business quickly, wash your hands and face with water so cold it makes your teeth ache, and head back to start another day. Breakfast is whatever's available. Maybe some cornbread left over from last night, slightly stale but still edible if you warm it over the stove. Maybe a cup of coffee stretched so thin it's basically brown water with ambition. Sugar is expensive, milk spoils fast without reliable refrigeration, and fresh fruit is a luxury you can't afford most weeks. You eat, standing up because there aren't enough chairs, and you eat fast because you've got to get to work, assuming you have work today, which is never guaranteed. The icebox in the corner holds whatever's left from the weekend, which isn't much. A small block of ice melts slowly in the upper compartment, dripping into a pan that someone forgot to empty again. The whole contraption sweats in summer and barely keeps things cold enough to matter. You've gotten creative with beans, with rice, with the cheapest cuts of meat the butcher is willing to sell. Pig's feet, ham hocks, chitlins, neck bones, all the parts white folks threw away until black cooks transformed them into something worth eating. Your grandmother would recognize the recipes, handed down from slavery times when making something from nothing wasn't a choice but a survival skill. Necessity is the mother of cuisine, and Harlem kitchens are nothing if not necessary. The women in this building could write cookbooks that would put fancy restaurants to shame, coaxing flavor from ingredients that cost pennies, stretching a single chicken into 3 meals through sheer determination and ancestral knowledge. So you've survived the morning routine in your crumbling tenement. Now let's talk about getting to work, assuming you're lucky enough to have a job. And luck is exactly what it takes, because Harlem in the 1920s is teeming with people who migrated north, chasing factory jobs that mostly don't exist for them anymore. The war is over. White soldiers came home, wanting their positions back, and suddenly those employment opportunities that beckon black Southerners northward have mysteriously evaporated. Signs that once read "Colored Help Wanted" have been replaced with "No colored need apply," or nothing at all, just closed doors and averted eyes. You're competing with thousands of other hopeful souls for whatever scraps the economy tosses your way. If you're a man, you might work as a porter, a janitor, an elevator operator. You might load trucks at the docks, or haul garbage, or do any of the 100 jobs white New Yorkers consider beneath them. The work is backbreaking, and the pay is insulting, but it's work, and work means survival. If you're a woman, you're probably doing domestic work, cleaning houses in white neighborhoods, scrubbing floors and washing dishes for families who won't let you use their bathroom because they're afraid you'll somehow contaminate it. You ride the subway downtown before dawn, arriving at back doors in neighborhoods where you'd be questioned by police if you walk down the sidewalk after dark. The mistress of the house inspects your work with suspicious eyes, runs her finger along mantles looking for dust, checks the corners for signs of laziness. She calls you by your first name while expecting you to call her mom. She pays you $3 a week if you're lucky, $5 if you're exceptional, and docks your wages for any infraction real or imagined. You smile and nod and say, "Yes, ma'am," because the alternative is no work at all. And no work means eviction, means hunger, means your children going without. You take the subway downtown, packed into cars with workers of every shade, though somehow the black passengers always seem to end up standing. The train smells of sweat and newsprint, and the particular exhaustion of people who work too hard for too little. Bodies press against you from all sides, strangers forced into intimacy by the crush of morning commute. You emerge into Manhattan and walk to your job, past storefronts that don't want your business, past restaurants where you couldn't eat even if you had the money, past a city that tolerates your labor but not your presence. White pedestrians don't make way for you on the sidewalk. You're the one who steps aside, who shrinks yourself smaller, who navigates around people who act as if you're invisible until you accidentally brush against them, at which point you become very visible. Indeed, the work itself is grueling. Let's say you're one of the fortunate ones with a steady position, maybe working in a hotel or a private club. You're on your feet for 10, 12, 14 hours. You smile when you don't feel like smiling. You say, "Yes, sir," and right away, "Mom," until the words lose all meaning, until they become reflexive sounds rather than actual responses. You're invisible when it's convenient and hypervisible when something goes wrong. A guest watch goes missing, and suddenly everyone's looking at you, the help, as if theft were coded into your DNA. The manager pulls you aside, asks questions that aren't really questions, searches your pockets with rough hands while other employees watch. They find nothing because you took nothing, but the suspicion clings to you anyway, an invisible stain that never quite washes out. You keep your head down and do your job and try not to think about the fact that you're better educated than half the people you're serving, that you can quote Shakespeare and solve equations they'd never attempt. But none of that matters because your skin determines your station, and your station is the service entrance. The pay is barely enough to cover rent, which is already 2 weeks overdue because your landlord raised it again. And what choice do you have? You can't move to a white neighborhood. They won't rent to you. Real estate agents practice something called blockbusting, scaring white families with threats of black neighbors, then buying their properties cheap and selling them dear to black families desperate for housing. You can't find cheaper housing in Harlem because every landlord knows they've got a captive market and prices accordingly. Some folks are paying twice what white families pay for half the space in buildings twice as decrepit. It's extortion with a smile, and everyone knows it. But knowing doesn't change anything. The rent is due regardless of fairness, and the eviction notice doesn't care about justice. After work, you take the train back uptown, joining the tide of exhausted bodies flowing back to Harlem. The sun is setting behind the buildings, painting the sky orange and pink, and for a moment the neighborhood looks almost beautiful. You pass the churches and the beauty parlours, the numbers runners on the corners trying to catch your eye with knowing glances, the street vendors selling hot dogs and pretzels and dreams of a better tomorrow. The smell of frying food mingles with exhaust fumes and garbage and the particular urban perfume of too many people packed too close together. You pass the storefront where Marcus Garvey's followers gather, talking about black nationalism and returning to Africa, about dignity and self-determination in a world that offers neither. Their uniforms are impressive, military style with gold braid, and their certainty is almost contagious, the belief that somewhere, somehow, there's a place where black folks can simply be. You pass the corner where old Mr. Johnson plays his guitar and sings blues so sad they make your chest hurt. Songs about Mississippi and lost love and the endless weight of being black in America. His voice is rough and beautiful, weathered by decades of life that hasn't been kind, but hasn't broken him either. The music follows you up the block, mixing with the clatter of the L train and the shouts of children playing stickball in the street. This is Harlem in the golden hour, the brief window between work and worry when the neighborhood feels alive with possibility. But let's talk about that legendary nightlife you've heard so much about. The Cotton Club, the Savoy Ballroom, all those famous spots where jazz was supposedly born and everybody danced until dawn. Here's the catch. Most of those clubs don't want you inside. The Cotton Club, that glamorous establishment you've seen in photographs, features black performers for white audiences. The doormen turn away black patrons, while white folks from downtown come uptown to experience what they call exotic entertainment. They sit at tables covered in white linen, sipping illegal champagne, watching black dancers perform routines designed to titillate and shock, jungle themes and primitive fantasies that have nothing to do with anyone's actual life. You might hear Duke Ellington or Cab Calloway from the street outside, the music drifting through closed doors into a neighborhood full of people who created this art form, but aren't allowed to enjoy it in its most famous venue. The irony is thick enough to choke on. You've been relegated to spectator status in your own cultural revolution. If you want to actually participate in Harlem nightlife, you're going to smaller clubs, basement joints, rent parties in people's apartments. The rent party is the real Harlem invention, a brilliant solution to an impossible problem. Your rent is due, you can't pay it, so you throw a party and charge admission. 25 cents at the door, maybe 50 cents for a plate of food, and you dance and drink and laugh until the sun comes up, hoping enough people show to cover what you owe before the landlord comes knocking Monday morning. Someone pushes the furniture against the walls. Someone else brings a piano player or a guitar man. Someone's cousin supplies the liquor, and suddenly your cramped apartment transforms into something magical. The floorboards bounce under dancing feet. The walls sweat with humidity from all those bodies pressed together. Strangers become friends, at least for the night, united by rhythm and the shared understanding that everyone here is just trying to survive. And those parties are genuine. The music is raw and beautiful, piano players pounding out boogie-woogie rhythms, while the floor shakes and the neighbors complain, and nobody cares, because everyone's trying to forget, for a few hours, how hard tomorrow's going to be. The dancers move with a freedom you don't see in daylight hours. Bodies, uncoiling from the tension of constant vigilance, expressing things that can't be spoken aloud. But don't romanticize it. These parties exist because people are desperate. The joy is real, but it's joy carved out of necessity, pleasure stolen from the jaws of poverty. You dance because if you don't dance, you'll cry, and crying doesn't pay the rent either. The liquor at these parties is probably bathtub gin, prohibition being in full swing, and what you're drinking might make you sick or blind or worse, depending on what the bootlegger cut it with. You've heard stories about people going blind from bad hooch, about wood alcohol poisonings, about batches laced with chemicals that'll land you in Harlem Hospital if you're lucky, and the morgue if you're not. The stuff burns going down, leaves a chemical aftertaste that no amount of sugar or juice can quite mask. But you drink anyway, because what else are you going to do? Stay sober and think about your problems. You drink and dance and pretend the world outside doesn't exist, at least until morning comes crashing in with all its demands. Now let's talk about something nobody wants to discuss when they romanticize the Harlem Renaissance. The violence. Not the dramatic, headline-grabbing violence of race riots, though that exists too, but the everyday violence of being black in a white city. The police don't protect you. They harass you. Walking home at night, you might get stopped for no reason, patted down against a wall, questioned about where you're going and why. The officer's hands are rough, his voice rougher, and his badge gives him permission to do whatever he wants. The wrong answer, or even the right answer delivered with insufficient deference, can land you in a jail cell or a hospital bed. Officers beat black men with impunity, knowing there's no accountability, no investigation, no justice. They call it tuning up, when they work someone over with nightsticks, a casual phrase for casual brutality. You learn to cross the street when you see a badge coming. You learn to keep your hands visible and your voice soft and your eyes down. You learn survival strategies that white New Yorkers never have to consider. Lessons passed from father to son, mother to daughter, an inheritance of caution that no one asked for but everyone receives. And it's not just the police. It's the knowledge that you exist outside the protection of the law, that if something happens to you, if you're robbed or assaulted or worse, there's no guarantee anyone will care. You're on your own in ways that are difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't lived it. White gangs from neighboring areas sometimes venture into Harlem, looking for trouble, knowing the consequences will be minimal. Black men who wander into the wrong neighborhood downtown face beatings or worse. The city is carved into territories, invisible lines you learn to respect if you want to keep breathing. And within Harlem itself, the desperation breeds its own violence. Men fighting over scraps, gambling debts settled with fists or worse, domestic disputes that spill into hallways and stairwells. The race riot of 1900 isn't ancient history to you. People remember. Elders speak of it in hushed tones, the terror of white mobs rampaging through black neighborhoods, the police standing aside or joining in. And smaller incidents happen constantly, flare-ups of racial tension that don't make the papers, but leave bruises and broken bones, and that particular trauma of knowing you're hated for existing. Some nights you hear about someone who got jumped coming home from work, some kid who looked at the wrong person the wrong way and paid for it with blood and broken teeth. The community closes ranks, watches out for each other, shares warnings about which blocks to avoid after dark. This isn't paranoia. This is survival. You navigate the city like someone walking through a minefield, always aware of where you are, who's around, what might happen. That constant vigilance takes a toll. It exhausts you in ways sleep can't fix, wears you down until the weariness lives in your bones like a second skeleton. And yet you keep going, because what choice do you have? This is home now, for better or worse, and you're determined to make something of it. Let's get back to your body for a moment, because your body is staging a quiet rebellion against your living conditions. The tenement you call home is a petri dish for disease. Tuberculosis is rampant, passing from person to person in those overcrowded rooms where everyone breathes the same stale air. They call it consumption, and the name is apt because it consumes everything. The lungs first, then the strength, then the hope. You know someone who died from it, probably multiple someones. Watch them cough their lives away in beds they shared with family members who would likely catch it next. The coughing starts small, almost nothing, just a tickle that won't quite clear. Then it deepens, becomes wet, produces blood-flecked sputum that everyone pretends not to notice. The sick person grows thin, grows pale beneath their dark skin, grows too weak to work, and then too weak to eat, and finally too weak to breathe. The doctors don't come to Harlem often, and when they do, they treat patients with a casual dismissiveness that borders on contempt. Harlem Hospital is overcrowded and underfunded. The staff stretch so thin that waiting times can be measured in days. If something serious happens to you, if you break a bone or develop an infection or have any of the 100 medical emergencies that strike randomly, your odds aren't good. Medicine in the 1920s is crude by modern standards anyway, but medicine for black folks is cruder still. You're an afterthought in a system that wasn't built with you in mind. And it's not just tuberculosis haunting these streets. Pneumonia sweeps through the tenements every winter, picking off the elderly and the young with terrifying efficiency. Influenza still lingers in collective memory, the great pandemic of 1918 having devastated Harlem with particular cruelty just a few years back. You remember it, or you've heard the stories from those who survived, the bodies piling up faster than they could be buried, entire families wiped out in a matter of days, the morgues overflowing, the churches holding funeral after funeral after funeral. The fear of another outbreak never quite leaves. Every cough, every fever, every child who seems a little too tired carries the weight of that memory. You treat illness with home remedies passed down from grandmothers with mustard plasters and onion poultices, and prayers whispered over steaming bowls of soup. You brew teas from roots and barks. Apply compresses soaked in herbs. Call on the wisdom of elders who learned healing in the South from those who learned it during slavery from those who remembered Africa. Sometimes it works, often it doesn't. But what else can you do when the hospital might turn you away and the doctor charges more than you make in a week? The summer is coming, and with it, a particular kind of misery. Your apartment becomes an oven. Heat building up in the brick and plaster until the rooms are barely habitable. There's no air conditioning, obviously, and your one window provides approximately zero relief. The air sits heavy and motionless, thick with humidity that makes every breath feel like work. You sleep on the fire escape if you can, joining the parade of bodies draped across every available outdoor surface, trying to catch whatever breeze the night offers. The metal grating presses patterns into your skin, but at least it's cooler than inside. Children splash in water from open hydrants while their parents watch from stoops. Everyone just trying to survive until September brings some relief. The smell of the neighborhood in August is something you never forget. Garbage ripening in the heat, sweat from 1,000 bodies, food going bad because iceboxes can't keep up with the temperature. Flies are everywhere, fat and lazy, landing on your food, your skin, your sleeping face. The constant buzzing becomes background noise, just part of summer's soundtrack, along with the shouts and the music, and the L train's endless rattle. And yet people find joy. Stoops become social clubs, where neighbors gather to gossip and commiserate and share whatever meager refreshment they can afford. Block parties spring up spontaneously. someone hauling a piano onto the sidewalk, everyone dancing in the street until the cops come to shut it down. Music pours from every window because suffering doesn't mean you stop living. It just means living takes more effort. Winter brings different problems. Your tenement's heating system, if it functions at all, produces heat so erratically that you never know whether you'll wake up sweating or shivering. The radiators clang and hiss like angry animals, sometimes working, sometimes sitting, cold and useless while you pile on every blanket you own. The wind finds every crack in the walls, every gap around the windows, sneaking in like an uninvited guest determined to steal whatever warmth you've managed to accumulate. You can see your breath indoors some mornings, little clouds that remind you the building doesn't care if you freeze. Coal is expensive, and when the building's supply runs low, the super just shrugs and tells you to complain to the landlord, who lives somewhere downtown and never returns calls. You stuff newspaper into the cracks, wear your coat indoors, sleep in your clothes. The children get sick first, then the old folks, then everyone else. A winter in a Harlem tenement is a war of attrition against the cold, and the cold usually wins a few battles before spring finally offers a truce. But here's where the story gets complicated, because despite everything, despite the poverty and the prejudice and the daily indignities that pile up like snow on a fire, Escape, Harlem in the 1920s, is producing something extraordinary. The writers and poets and musicians who'll define a cultural movement are living in these same tenements, attending these same rent parties, navigating these same impossible conditions. Langston Hughes is wandering these streets, gathering material that'll become some of the most important poetry in American history. He's working odd jobs, just like you, washing dishes, bussing tables, doing whatever it takes to survive while he writes about the beauty and pain of black life in America. Zora Neale Hurston is listening to the stories and the slang, absorbing the rhythms that'll infuse her novels. She's sitting on those same stoops, attending those same church services, filing away every detail of a community that the wider world refuses to see as fully human. The Harlem Renaissance isn't happening in fancy galleries or well-funded institutions. It's happening in cramped apartments and church basements and anywhere else. Black artists can find space to work. This is genius flourishing against all odds. Creativity as resistance, art as survival. You might brush shoulders with these people on the street, might hear them reading at a literary gathering in someone's living room, might not realize until decades later that you witnessed something historic. The barbershops and beauty parlors are where ideas spread as fast as gossip. You sit in the chair waiting for your haircut, and the conversation swirls around you like cigarette smoke. Politics and philosophy, sports and scandal, who's hiring and who's cheating on whom. All of it mixing together in spaces that serve as community centers, debate halls, and therapy offices rolled into one. The barber knows everyone's business because everyone tells him everything while he's got them captive in his chair. He's heard about your troubles at work, your landlord's latest outrage, your cousin's new baby. He dispenses advice along with the haircuts, wisdom, accumulated from years of listening to every voice in the neighborhood. His scissors snip in rhythm with his words, punctuation marks in an endless sermon about life and how to live it. For women, the beauty parlor offers similar refuge, a place to get your hair pressed and your spirit lifted, to share burdens and trade recipes, and remember that you're not alone in this struggle. The smell of hot combs and pomade, the hiss of steam, the intimate act of one woman tending another's hair. These rituals bind the community together in ways that outsiders never understand. The church anchors everything. Sunday morning, the neighborhood transforms as everyone puts on their best clothes and streams toward their chosen congregation. Baptist, Methodist, AME, Pentecostal. The flavors of Black Christianity are all represented, and each service is part worship, part social event, part affirmation that you matter in a world determined to convince you otherwise. The music in these churches would make angels weep, voices blending in harmonies that carry every emotion, from despair to transcendent joy. The choir rocks and sways, the congregation responds with amens and hallelujahs, and for a few hours the weight lifts. You're not a servant or porter or an invisible presence in someone else's city. You're a child of God, dignified and beloved, and part of a community that stretches back through slavery and forward into a future that has to be better than this, because how could it possibly be worse? The preachers speak of Moses and deliverance, of justice rolling down like waters, of a promised land that waits for those who persevere, and even if you don't quite believe it's coming, the promise is enough to get you through another week. After service, the congregations spill onto the sidewalks, trading greetings and handshakes and invitations to Sunday dinner. The neighborhood transformed briefly into something that almost resembles the promised land everyone came here seeking. Let's talk about the numbers, because the numbers run everything, and everyone plays. It's an illegal lottery operated by men and women who figured out how to build empires in the margins of a society that won't let them succeed legitimately. You pick 3 numbers, bet whatever you can afford to lose, and if your combination matches some published statistic, maybe stock exchange figures or racetrack results, you win at 600 to 1 odds. The chances of winning are minuscule, but the dream of winning that keeps people betting their lunch money, their rent money, their hope. The numbers runners are everywhere, working the streets and the bars and the barbershops, collecting slips and coins from people who'd rather gamble on fortune than accept their fate. They know everyone by name. Remember your usual numbers. Extend credit when times are especially hard. Some of the biggest entrepreneurs in Harlem got their start running numbers, building businesses and political influence from what white society dismisses as mere crime. But is it crime when legitimate paths to success have been systematically blocked? Is it crime when you're just trying to build something in a system designed to keep you with nothing? The numbers also provide jobs, hundreds of them, runners and collectors and bookkeepers and enforcers, an entire underground economy operating in plain sight because the police can be paid to look elsewhere. Madame Stephanie Sinclair, the numbers queen, runs her operation with corporate precision, fighting off Italian mobsters who want a piece of her territory, bribing officials, employing lawyers, living proof that Black women can build empires even when every institution insists otherwise. She's fierce and brilliant and utterly unapologetic. A self-made millionaire in an age when Black women are supposed to be invisible. You might work for her organization if you're smart and reliable and willing to operate outside the law. The pay is better than honest work offers, and there's something satisfying about succeeding in a game rigged against you, even if success comes with risks the straight world doesn't require. She takes out ads in the local papers, warns the community about police corruption, becomes a folk hero to people who've learned that respectability offers no protection anyway. Let's talk about the children for a moment, because they're everywhere in Harlem, running through streets that serve as their playground, their classroom, their entire world. They play stickball with broomsticks and rubber balls, hopscotch on sidewalks chalked with squares, tag and hide and seek in alleyways that adults avoid after dark. They grow up fast here, learning early which streets are safe and which aren't. how to read a stranger's intentions from across the block, when to run and when to freeze. School is mandatory, but often interrupted, missed when there's work to be done, or younger siblings to watch, or no shoes fit for walking through winter slush. The classrooms are overcrowded, the teachers underpaid and sometimes undertrained, the textbooks outdated hand-me-downs from white schools downtown. But education is valued, treasured even, because everyone knows it's the only ladder out of this life. Mothers who work double shifts still check homework by candlelight. Fathers who can barely read themselves demand that their children learn to write. The dream of a better life passes down through generations, encoded in expectations that no amount of poverty can extinguish. You head home as the night settles over Harlem, the streetlights casting pools of yellow light on sidewalks still busy with people. Someone's playing piano through an open window, something slow and melancholy, and you stop for a moment to listen. A group of men on the corner are arguing about Marcus Garvey's latest speech, voices rising with passion as they debate Africa and America and where black people truly belong. His message resonates with folks who've tried everything else, who've worked hard and played by the rules and still ended up nowhere. Back to Africa sounds like freedom to people who've never felt free anywhere. A woman sells fried fish from a cart, the smell of hot oil and cornmeal filling the air, and you're tempted even though you can't really afford it. She gives you a smile that suggests she knows your situation, that she's been there too, that maybe she'll give you an extra piece if you ask nicely. Children who should be in bed are still playing in the shadows, their laughter punctuating the night, and you wonder what kind of world they'll inherit, whether it'll be any kinder than the one you're navigating now. You climb the stairs to your apartment, each step creaking under your weight, and let yourself into the crowded rooms where your family is already settling in for the night. Someone's moved your pallet again, and you have to negotiate for sleeping space. But eventually, you find a spot and lie, down with your back against the wall and your coat draped over you like a blanket. The sounds of the tenement fill your ears. Conversations through thin walls, a baby crying somewhere above you, the distant thump of music from a party down the block, a couple arguing in rapid-fire voices that rise and fall like jazz improvisation. The ceiling has water stains that you've memorized, abstract shapes that look different every time you study them. You think about tomorrow, another day of work and worry, another day of being something less than fully human in the eyes of a city that needs your labor, but not your presence. You think about the South you left behind, the terror and the poverty, and the particular cruelty of a system designed to keep you in your place forever. You think about the family you lost along the way, the ones who didn't survive the journey north, the ones still stuck in Alabama or Georgia or Mississippi, writing letters about how they might join you someday. And you think about what you're building here, despite everything, the community and the culture and the stubborn insistence on joy that no amount of hardship can extinguish. The Harlem Renaissance they'll write about in history books isn't happening in museums or universities. It's happening in this room, in rooms just like it all across the neighborhood, in the stories people tell and the songs they sing, and the way they carry themselves with dignity no matter what the world throws at them. You're part of it, even if you never publish a poem or play a note of jazz. Your survival is the foundation everything else is built on. Your presence is what makes the Renaissance possible. The thousands of ordinary black folks who migrated north carrying their dreams and their pain and their unshakable belief that somewhere, somehow, things could be better. You didn't come here to be a historical figure. You came here to live. And living in a world determined to make that difficult turns out to be. Its own kind of revolution. Tomorrow you'll wake up again in this overcrowded apartment. Fight for the bathroom. Eat whatever's available. Ride the train downtown. Work until your body aches. Come home to this same neighborhood that's somehow both prison and sanctuary. You'll navigate the same dangers, face the same indignities, find the same small pleasures that make existence bearable. You'll listen to music that'll outlive everyone who created it. You'll eat food that carries the memory of places most people here are trying to forget. You'll speak a language that mixes southern roots with northern ambitions, that creates slang and poetry from the raw material of everyday survival. And if you're lucky, truly lucky, you'll make it through. You'll raise children who have more choices than you did. You'll see Harlem transform from a promised land that fell short to something else entirely, carrying both the triumphs and traumas into whatever comes next. So no, you probably wouldn't last a day in 1920s Harlem. Not the real one anyway. The Harlem of history books and jazz albums and romanticized memory is easier to love from a distance. The actual neighborhood, with its tuberculosis and its tenements and its rent parties born from desperation, demands more than most modern visitors could give. It demands resilience forged in the fire of slavery and tempered by the relentless pressure of being black in America. It demands creativity that flourishes despite neglect, joy that persists despite sorrow, hope that survives despite evidence. The people who lived there weren't heroes in any conventional sense. They were just people doing what people do, trying to survive and maybe build something that outlasts them. And somehow, against every odd, they did exactly that. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your own bed, with your own bathroom down the hall, with heat that works and water that runs clean, you can spare a thought for those who came before, the ones who rode trains north carrying everything they owned in cardboard suitcases, the ones who squeezed into tenements that should have been condemned, the ones who worked jobs that crushed their bodies and still came home to dance at rent parties, because what else could they do? They built a world inside a world, a black metropolis in a white city, a renaissance in the middle of a ghetto. They gave America jazz and blues and poetry that still resonates a century later. And they did it all while being told every single day that they didn't matter. They proved that wrong in ways that echo through history. Their blood, their sweat, their impossible persistence, all of it stitched into the culture we inherited. So rest well tonight, and know that the music you love, the art you admire, the very language you speak, carries traces of people who survived what you couldn't imagine and created beauty that you'll never stop benefiting from. One crowded apartment, one rent party, one stubborn heartbeat at a time. Congratulations. You've just made the most dangerous decision of your life. You're running. Not jogging for exercise, not hurrying to catch a train. Running for your freedom, which means running for your life. Because in the American South before the Civil War, those two things were exactly the same. The year is 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act has just passed, which means even if you make it to the North, you're not safe. Federal law now requires citizens everywhere to help capture you. There's a bounty on your head. Slave catchers with dogs and guns are already being hired, and you're standing at the edge of a tobacco field in Virginia, barefoot, wearing clothes that mark you as property, with nothing but the North Star and a prayer. Here's the thing about escaping slavery that the stories don't emphasize enough. You don't know where you're going. You've never seen a map. You can't read. You've never traveled more than a few miles from the plantation where you were born. The North is a concept, a whispered promise, a direction, but you don't know how far it is You don't know what states you'll cross. You don't know which rivers to ford or which towns to avoid. You know almost nothing, and that nothing might get you killed. The decision to run wasn't made lightly. People planned for months, sometimes years. They stashed food when they could, a handful of cornmeal here, a piece of dried meat there, hidden in hollowed logs or buried in specific spots they'd memorized. They watched the sky, learning which stars pointed north, because compasses weren't exactly available at the general store for enslaved people. They listened to whispered conversations, picking up fragments of information about roads, about conductors, about places where a knock on the right door might mean shelter instead of chains. Some learned coded songs, spirituals that seemed to be about heaven, but were really about escape routes. Follow the Drinking Gourd wasn't just a hymn. It was a map sung, in plain sight of overseers who never understood what they were hearing. And still, most who ran were caught. The numbers are grim. Historians estimate that of the millions held in bondage, only around 100,000 successfully escaped via the Underground Railroad over its decades of operation. That sounds like a lot until you realize it represents a fraction of a fraction. For every person who made it to freedom, dozens were dragged back, beaten, sold further south, where escape became nearly impossible, or killed as an example to others. You're not just running from slavery, you're running into those odds. The first night is the worst, not because of what happens, but because of what doesn't. Nothing feels real yet. Your body is moving through the darkness, pushing through undergrowth, stumbling over roots you can't see, and your mind keeps telling you this isn't happening. You keep expecting to wake up in your cabin, to hear the overseer's bell, to realize it was all a dream. But the scratches on your arms are real. The cold night air filling your lungs is real. The sound of your own heartbeat pounding in your ears, that's painfully real. And somewhere behind you, in the direction you're fleeing from, someone is going to notice you're gone. The question isn't if they'll come looking, it's when, and whether they'll bring dogs. Because they usually bring dogs. You move through the trees, feeling branches whip against your face. Thorns tear at your ankles. The darkness is so complete that you're navigating more by feel than sight. Your hands reach ahead of you, touching bark, pushing aside vines, finding the gaps between obstacles. Every sense you have is straining for information. The smell of water might mean a stream nearby, a chance to drink or to mask your trail. The smell of smoke might mean a farmhouse, which could be salvation or doom depending on who lives there. Let's talk about what you're wearing, which is to say, almost nothing useful. Enslaved people weren't given travel gear. You might have a single layer of rough Osnaburg cloth, a coarse fabric that was cheap to produce and uncomfortable to wear. Your feet are bare or wrapped in scraps of leather that barely qualify as shoes. The soles are thin enough that every rock and root bites into your flesh. If it's winter, you're in serious trouble. If it's summer, the mosquitoes and humidity will eat you alive in different ways. You have no coat, no hat, no gloves. Every piece of clothing you own screams that you're a runaway. The fabric, the cut, the patches, all of it marks you as enslaved to anyone who looks closely. And people will look closely because in the South, everyone was taught to watch for runaways. It was civic duty. It was potential profit. A captured fugitive meant a reward, and rewards motivated even people who claimed to oppose slavery. Your appearance is a liability you cannot change, at least not until you reach a safe house where someone might provide you with different clothes. Until then, you're moving through hostile territory, wearing a uniform that identifies you as prey. Your first obstacle isn't the distance or the cold or the dogs. It's the landscape itself. The South was designed to keep you trapped. Plantations were deliberately isolated, surrounded by miles of wilderness, swamps and rivers with few crossings. Roads were watched, bridges were patrolled. The geography was your prison before the chains ever were. If you're escaping from the deep South, from Georgia or Alabama or Mississippi, you're facing hundreds of miles of hostile terrain before you reach anywhere remotely safe. The Appalachian Mountains loom in the distance, and while they offered cover, they also offered cliffs, freezing temperatures, and the very real possibility of getting hopelessly lost. The trails through those mountains were treacherous even for people who knew them well. For someone who'd never left a plantation, they were deadly mazes. Some runaways, headed for Florida, hoping to find refuge with Seminole communities who had their own reasons to resist white authority. Others aimed for Mexico, which had abolished slavery and offered genuine freedom. But most pointed themselves north, toward states that were nominally free, toward Canada, toward a border that seemed impossibly far away. The distances involved are staggering when you think about them. From the deep South to Canada could be over 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles on foot, at night, through territory that wanted you dead or returned to chains. Now imagine the sounds of that first night. Every snapped twig makes you freeze. Every rustle in the undergrowth could be a patrol, a dog, a snake, or just a rabbit that nearly gave you a heart attack. Owls call overhead, their hoots echoing through the trees, and you don't know if that's a good sign or bad. You don't know what's edible and what's poisonous. You don't know which water is safe to drink. You're operating on terror and hope in roughly equal measures, and both are exhausting fuels. The psychological weight of what you're doing settles in slowly. You've left behind everyone you know, family members, friends, the only community you've ever had. Some of them might have helped you plan this. Some of them might not know you're gone yet, and some of them you'll never see again, no matter what happens. The grief runs parallel to the fear, and you can't afford to feel either one too deeply, because feeling means stopping, and stopping means dying. You might have left behind children, a spouse, parents who are too old to make the journey themselves. You carry their faces in your mind like weights that make every step harder, but you also carry their hopes. Some of them wanted you to go precisely because they couldn't. By dawn, you need to hide. Traveling by day is suicide. Too many eyes, too many patrols, too many ordinary people who turn you in for the reward, or simply because the law told them to. So, you find a thicket, a hollow log, a depression in the ground covered by fallen branches. You curl into the smallest shape you can manage and try not to breathe too loudly. The hiding spots themselves were often horrific. Runaways spent days curled in cramped spaces barely large enough to contain a human body. They lay in swamps with only their noses above water. They pressed themselves into root cellars among rotting vegetables. They endured any discomfort because discovery meant something worse. Sleep doesn't come easy when every sound is a threat, when you're cold and hungry and terrified, when the ground is damp and insects are exploring your body like it's their new home. But eventually, exhaustion wins. Your body shuts down whether you want it to or not. And somewhere in those fitful hours of half sleep, you dream of freedom, or you dream of chains. Sometimes both at once. Let's talk about hunger, because it's going to become your constant companion. You couldn't bring much food. There wasn't much to bring. And what you did manage to hide, maybe some cornbread, maybe a few strips of dried pork, that's gone within the first few days. Now you're foraging, and you don't know what you're doing. Berries that look edible might be poisonous. Roots that seem safe might make you violently ill. If you're lucky, You find streams with crawfish or fish you can catch with your hands. If you're not lucky, you're eating leaves and bark, and whatever you can find that won't kill you immediately. Some runaways ate raw corn stolen from fields, risking discovery for a handful of calories. Others dug up wild onions and roots they half recognized from plantation gardens. The taste didn't matter. Only the fuel mattered. Starvation doesn't happen fast. It happens slow. Your body starts consuming itself. Your muscles weaken. Your mind grows foggy at exactly the moments you need it sharpest. After a week of running on almost nothing, you're a shadow of whoever you were before, and the journey might be just beginning. Your body is failing you at the very moment when you need it most, and there's nothing you can do except keep moving and hope you find food before the weakness overtakes you completely. Water is almost as complicated. Rivers and streams offer hydration, but also dangers. The water might carry diseases that will lay you low days later, when you're too far from help and too weak to continue. Crossing rivers means getting wet, and wet in cold weather means hypothermia. Your body can't maintain its temperature when soaked, and once that core temperature drops, confusion sets in. You make bad decisions. You stop shivering, which sounds like improvement, but is actually your body giving up. But you can't avoid water. You need it to survive, and sometimes you need it to throw off the dogs. Wading through streams and swamps can confuse the scent trail, buying you precious hours before the hounds pick it up again. Some runaways spent days in swamps, chest deep in murky water, waiting for pursuit to pass. They shared those waters with alligators, water moccasins, and clouds of mosquitoes so thick you could choke on them. The Great Dismal Swamp on the Virginia-North Carolina border became a refuge for entire communities of escaped people, living for years in conditions that would break most modern humans in days. They built settlements in that swamp, established lives, raised families, all while surrounded by danger from both nature and the slave catchers who feared to follow them in. They survived because the alternative was worse. They survived because freedom was worth any price. And then there were the dogs. Bloodhounds bred and trained specifically to hunt human beings. The sound of their baying in the distance is something that entered the nightmares of every person who ever ran. These weren't pets. They were weapons, four-legged instruments of terror that could track a scent trail for miles, through water, through undergrowth, through every obstacle you tried to put between yourself and capture. Slave owners invested heavily in these animals, breeding them for persistence, training them from puppies to follow human scent above all others. The dogs were often more valuable than the enslaved people they hunted, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on anyone. When you heard those dogs getting closer, you had options, none of them good. You could try to find water deep enough to break your trail. You could climb a tree and pray they passed beneath you. You could keep running and hope you were faster than the men behind the dogs. Or you could prepare to fight, knowing that fighting usually meant dying. The dogs weren't trained to kill necessarily. They were trained to hold you until their owners arrived. But being held by dogs meant being bitten, clawed, terrified into submission. The physical scars were nothing compared to what it did to your spirit. Some people who were caught by dogs and returned to slavery never recovered mentally. The trauma lived in their bodies forever. And if the dogs caught you, the men weren't far behind. And the men had whips, chains, and the legal authority to do whatever they wanted to you. Here's a detail that often gets lost in the tellings. The Underground Railroad wasn't a railroad, and it wasn't underground. It was a loose network of safe houses, sympathetic individuals, and secret routes. The railroad terminology, conductors, stations, passengers, all of that was code designed to confuse anyone who might be listening. But it wasn't organized like a modern network. There was no central command, no guaranteed next stop, no ticket you could purchase that ensured arrival. Each conductor knew only their small piece of the route. If one link broke, the whole chain could collapse for everyone depending on it. The secrecy that protected the network also made it fragile. A single arrest could unravel years of careful organization. You might arrive at a safe house only to find the family had moved or been arrested or simply lost their nerve. Then you were back in the wilderness with no plan and no help, and the dog still howling somewhere behind you. The system worked because it was decentralized, but that same quality meant you could never fully rely on it. You were always ultimately alone with your own wits and luck. The conductors themselves were remarkable people, and not just for the obvious reasons. Harriet Tubman, the most famous of them, made 19 trips back into slave territory to lead people north, carrying a pistol and a fierce determination that bordered on the supernatural. She reportedly never lost a passenger, a record almost impossible to believe given the dangers involved. Tubman suffered from seizures caused by a head injury she'd received as a child, hit by a metal weight thrown by an overseer. Those seizures could strike at any moment, leaving her temporarily incapacitated. She made those 19 trips anyway. She carried a gun not just for defense against slave catchers, but reportedly to convince any passenger who wanted to turn back that turning back wasn't an option. A returning runaway could be tortured into revealing the route, endangering everyone. Better to die free than to endanger the whole network. But Tubman was one of many. White abolitionists risked imprisonment and social ruin to hide runaways in their homes. Free black communities in northern cities organized protection networks. Quakers violated their pacifist principles to arm and defend escaped people. Native American communities offered sanctuary when they could. Each person who helped was breaking federal law after 1850, risking fines, prison, and worse. They did it anyway, because some things matter more than safety. But trusting strangers was a gamble every single time. You're approaching a house you've been told is safe. You see a lantern in the window, the signal you were promised. But what if it's a trap? What if the conductor was captured and forced to reveal the signal? What if someone informed and the slave catchers are waiting inside? There were documented cases of exactly this happening. Slave catchers learned the signals, set traps, posed as conductors to catch runaways at their most vulnerable moment. You stand in the darkness, watching that light, trying to decide whether it means freedom or chains. Your whole body is screaming at you to run, to trust no one, to stay hidden in the wilderness, where at least you know the dangers. But the wilderness is killing you slowly. You haven't eaten properly in days. Winter is coming. You need help, so you approach the door, every step feeling like a walk toward your own execution. You knock and you wait, and in that moment you understand prayer more deeply than any sermon ever taught you. Let's say the house is safe. Let's say you're welcomed inside by people who risk everything to help you. What then? You can't rest long. A few hours, maybe a night if you're lucky. They give you food, real food, warm food, and your stomach cramps because it's forgotten how to process anything besides desperation. The first real meal after days of starvation is almost painful. Your shrunken stomach rebels against abundance. You eat slowly, carefully, knowing that gorging yourself will only make you sick. They give you clothes that don't mark you as a runaway. Maybe the rough outfit of a free laborer, something that might buy you a few seconds of doubt if someone stops you. They tell you about the next station, the next conductor, the signals to look for. They warn you about which roads to avoid, which towns have aggressive patrols, where the safe crossings are. You memorize everything because you can't write it down. If you're captured with a written route, everyone along that route is exposed. The information stays in your head, and your head stays attached to your body only as long as you're smart and lucky. The cold. Let's return to the cold because it deserves more attention. Many escapes happened in winter, counterintuitive as that sounds. The frozen ground was easier to travel than mud. Rivers could sometimes be crossed on ice, and the long nights gave more hours of darkness to move without being seen. Winter also meant fewer people outdoors, fewer eyes watching roads and fields. But winter was also a killer with no malice, just physics. Your body loses heat faster than you can generate it. Your fingers and toes go numb, then painful, then numb again, in a way that means damage. Frostbite took extremities from runaways who had no shelter, no proper clothing, no fire that might give away their position. You couldn't build a fire most nights. The light and smoke would be visible for miles, a beacon announcing your location to anyone hunting you. So you shivered through the darkness, curled tight to conserve warmth, counting the hours until dawn brought slightly warmer temperatures. Some people froze to death within sight of safe houses, too weak to cover those final miles. Others survived the cold, but lost pieces of themselves to it. Fingers and toes that turned black and fell away. Permanent reminders of what they'd paid for freedom. The irony of surviving the journey, only to lose parts of your body, wasn't lost on anyone. Consider crossing the Ohio River, one of the most famous boundaries between slave and nominally free territory. In winter, the ice could be thick enough to walk on, but you never knew for certain. Every step might be your last if the ice cracked beneath you. You test the ice ahead of you, listening for that terrible sound of fracturing, ready to throw yourself backward if the surface gave way. The water below was cold enough to kill in minutes. If you fell through, there was no rescue. No one was coming to save you. You either pulled yourself out immediately or you died. Some people made it across and collapsed on the far bank, too frozen to move, found by conductors who carried them to warmth or found by slave catchers who dragged them back to bondage. In warmer months, you needed a boat, which meant finding someone willing to row you across or stealing a vessel and hoping you could navigate currents you didn't understand. The river was watched, patrolled, lined with eyes that knew what to look for. Crossing it was a moment of maximum vulnerability. Out in the open water, no place to hide. Everything depending on speed and darkness and luck. And here's the cruel twist that the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 delivered. Even if you made it north, you weren't free. Federal marshals could arrest you anywhere in the country. Citizens were legally required to assist in your capture, facing fines if they refused. The penalties for helping you had increased dramatically. Suddenly the northern states, which had seemed like promised land, became just another layer of danger. You couldn't stop running until you reached Canada, and Canada was hundreds of miles further still. Some people who thought they'd made it were captured years later, living in northern cities, working jobs, building lives. They'd married, had children, established themselves in communities. All of it could be torn away in an instant by someone who recognized you or someone who was paid to hunt you. Slave catchers operated openly in northern cities, scanning black communities for faces that matched reward posters. The paranoia didn't end at the Mason-Dixon line. It followed you forever, until you crossed that final border into Canada and stood on soil where American law couldn't reach you. Now imagine you've been running for weeks, You've crossed rivers. You've hidden in barns and cellars and haystacks. You've eaten things you'd rather not name and walked until your feet bled and then walked more. Your feet are a ruin of blisters and open wounds. Every step is agony, but you keep stepping. You've watched over your shoulder so constantly that you've forgotten what it feels like to look forward without fear. You're close now, maybe a day from the border, maybe hours. And that's when the worst thought arrives. What if none of it was worth it? What if you're captured at the final step? What if everything you've suffered amounts to nothing but a story about a runaway who almost made it? That psychological torment was as brutal as anything physical. The hope was killing you as surely as the pursuit, because hope meant you had something to lose, and having something to lose meant every moment was weighted with potential devastation. You're so close that you can almost feel freedom, and that almost is the cruelest feeling of all. The emotional toll extended beyond the individual runner. Those left behind didn't know what happened to you. They might never know. Did you make it? Did you die in some swamp? Are you living free somewhere, unable to send word because any letter could be traced? The silence was a kind of ongoing death for everyone who loved you. Mothers who sent. Children north spent the rest of their lives wondering. Children who left parents behind carried that weight forever. And if you did make it, if you reached Canada and built a new life, that silence cut both ways. You couldn't go back. You couldn't safely contact anyone. The people who helped you escape might be dead, arrested, or still working to help others. You were free, but freedom came with a particular loneliness that nothing quite healed. Some people who made it to Canada spent years trying to find ways to buy family members out of bondage, sending money south through intermediaries, hoping against hope that freedom could be purchased for the people they'd left behind. Let's talk about the Underground Railroad's unsung participants. Not just the famous conductors, but the ordinary people who made it work. The farmers who left barn doors unlocked and asked no questions. The merchants who lost customers because they were rumored to be abolitionists but kept helping anyway. The free black communities who had the most to lose, targeted as they were by laws designed to criminalize their very existence, but who organized anyway because they knew what slavery meant and couldn't turn away from those fleeing it. These communities established vigilance committees to protect runaways and watch for slave catchers. They raised funds to support escaped people in their first months of freedom. They risked their own freedom every single day. The risk these people took wasn't dramatic. It was daily, grinding, constant. Every morning they woke up wondering if this was the day they'd be discovered. Every knock on the door could be federal marshals. Every stranger in town could be a spy. And they kept going anyway. Think about the children who ran, because children escaped too. Sometimes with parents, sometimes alone. Imagine being 12 years old and walking through the wilderness at night, hungry and terrified, with no adult to guide you. Imagine being a mother running with an infant, knowing that if the baby cried at the wrong moment, you'd both be caught. There are documented cases of mothers using laudanum to quiet infants, risking their children's health because the alternative was capture. Some parents made the heartbreaking choice to send children ahead alone, hoping the child had a better chance without an adult slowing them down. Some parents gave children away to conductors, trusting strangers completely because the alternative was raising a child in bondage. These decisions haunted people for the rest of their lives, whether the outcomes were good or bad. The calculus of slavery forced impossible choices on people who only wanted to protect their families. Every choice was wrong. Every choice was also the best option available. And now, consider the endurance required. Not just physical endurance, though, that was enormous. The psychological endurance to keep moving when every instinct screamed, stop. The spiritual endurance to maintain hope when hope seemed irrational. The emotional endurance to suppress grief, fear, and rage into something you could carry without it breaking you. Runaways developed a kind of mental armor that allowed them to keep functioning in impossible circumstances. They compartmentalized trauma in real time, pushing down emotions that would have paralyzed them if felt fully. This was a survival adaptation, and it left marks that didn't show on the skin. People who made it to freedom sometimes struggled for years afterward, the delayed weight of everything they'd suppressed finally demanding to be felt. You wouldn't last a day. That's not an insult. It's recognition of how extraordinary the people who did last were. They came from a world designed to crush their humanity, and they refused to be crushed. They made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. They trusted strangers when trust was insane. They kept walking when walking was torture. They believed in freedom before they'd ever experienced it, held onto an idea so tightly that it pulled them across hundreds of miles of danger. They did this without maps, without supplies, without any guarantee of success. They did this knowing that most who tried would fail. They did this anyway. When you finally do cross that border, if you cross it, the moment isn't what you expected. There's no ceremony, no trumpets, just another step forward onto ground that looks exactly like the ground behind you. Trees look the same. Snow looks the same. The cold biting at your face feels identical on both sides of an invisible line. But something shifts in your chest. Something you didn't know was clenched finally releases. You're still hungry. You're still cold. You're still exhausted and damaged and carrying wounds that will never fully heal. But you're free. The word means something different now than it did before you ran. It means possibility. It means tomorrow isn't already written by someone who owns you. It means you belong to yourself, finally, irrevocably, no matter what happens next. You might stand there for a long moment, just feeling the reality of it. You're in Canada. You're free. No one can drag you back. The law that defined you as property has no power here. The Underground Railroad wasn't a single story. It was thousands of stories, each one unique, each one a testament to courage that most of us will never have to find in ourselves. The conductors who risked everything, the passengers who walked through hell, the ordinary people who left doors open and asked no questions. All of them participated in something that looked impossible and made it possible anyway. They didn't just free individuals. They demonstrated something about human beings that we still need to remember. They proved that systems of oppression, no matter how powerful they seem, are never as strong as the human will to be free. So tonight, as you lie in your warm bed, in your safe home, in a world where freedom is assumed, rather than earned with blood and terror, you might spare a thought for those who walked before you. They ran through darkness so thick it swallowed everything. They trusted stars and strangers and something inside themselves that refused to accept the unacceptable. They survived conditions that would break you and me, not because they were superhuman, but because they were human in the deepest sense, capable of enduring what seemed unendurable when the cause was worth it. The Underground Railroad isn't just history. It's a reminder that the most ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide that some things matter more than safety, more than comfort, more than their own survival. Every safe house was a small rebellion. Every mile walked in darkness was a declaration. Every person who made it to freedom carried proof that the system designed to hold them was weaker than the spirit it tried to crush. That proof mattered not just for them, but for everyone who came after. It mattered for the abolitionist movement that drew strength from every successful escape. It mattered for the nation that would eventually tear itself apart over the question of slavery. It matters still today, as a reminder of what humans are capable of, both the cruelty and the resistance. You wouldn't last a day, but those who did, they changed everything. And their courage echoes still in every fight for freedom, in every refusal to accept injustice, in every step taken into uncertainty, because the alternative is surrender. They ran so that you could rest. They suffered so that their descendants might live without suffering. The least we can do is remember them, not as symbols, but as people, scared and brave and desperately human, walking north beneath the same stars that shine above you tonight.